Good morning. It is Wednesday, January 28th, 2026. You're listening to Weather with Enthusiasm. This is your weather enthusiast, Simcha Lefton, bringing you the latest on a developing situation which is serious here in the Chicago area. I do not know if other forecasters are speaking about this yet. You know, a week ago, they weren't. They were not speaking about the lake effect snow on Sunday. At least the National Weather Service was not. All eyes were focused on other systems and storms developing in the Midwest. But on this podcast, we did speak about the Sunday setup because it's something which is impacting us locally. This time around, we once again have, this is even more intense, we have very favorable conditions setting itself up for lake effect snow here in Chicago for this Friday and Shabbos. In fact, in many ways, I know I've never seen anything so significant. This reminds me of things that happen in Buffalo. We frequently say a lot that Chicago does not normally receive significant lake effect snow. We get lake enhancement. It feels like we've been saying that so much this winter that maybe we're going to have to stop saying it. But we've already had two significant lake effect snow events this winter. The first one was a mind-boggler, took place in the beginning of November with lake water temperatures in the 50s. But you have a polar vortex back then of 41 degrees below zero Fahrenheit temperatures at 500 MB into the atmosphere, 18,000 feet into the atmosphere. Of course, that wasn't the most important part, but temperatures were very cold here on the surface, and we had a drastic temperature difference between the surface temperatures of the lake, which were in the 50s, and the temperatures up 5,000 feet above into the atmosphere. What you need in order to get organized lake effect snow is there has to be a 23 degree Fahrenheit or 13 degree Celsius difference between the lake surface temperature, the water temperature, and the temperature at the 850 MB level. That's 5,000 feet approximately up into the atmosphere. And when you have that, that's the minimal you need in order to get organized lake effect snow. But the larger that contrast is, the more intense the lake effect snow is going to be. And this one is similar to the one in the beginning of November. That one was a very intense situation. That was very intense because you had lake water temperatures in the 50s, and you had, I believe we would have to go back to that podcast, but I believe it was 40 degrees colder. Temperatures were 40 degrees colder up there. And that's what we were speaking about. And that's why we had parts of the Chicago area that actually got buried with a foot of snow. This was back in the beginning of November. It was more localized, but something that was really remarkable that happened in the beginning of November. We also had another storm at the end of November. It was not lake effect, but just November storms. To get a southern stream storm that accumulates all the way to the lake in November is rare, because we spoke about that, why it's rare, and we don't want to take up too much time with that. You can listen to that podcast back at the end of November's podcast. But we had an event this past weekend, which we did point out here on this podcast last Wednesday, of the potential for this happening. So anyone who listened over here would have known of this potentially happening on Sunday, and it did happen. The Chicago area got between 4 and 10 inches of snow this past Sunday. The O'Hare Airport got 4.4 inches. West Ridge, which commonly is called West Rogers Park, got 6 inches. Evanston, 8 point some inches. And downtown at the Loop, 10.5 inches. This is all lake effect. This is a very significant event for Chicago. These types of snowfall accumulations generally happen from system storms. They don't happen from lake effect, but again, for the second time this winter, we've managed to do it, and the first time was November. But listen to this. We're getting prepared for time number 3, and this time around, the National Weather Service is mentioning it. The National Weather Service is mentioning it, so it's not just going to be over here, but let me explain to you what's going on here. And we're also going to explain something about the East Coast, where we have probably the most favorable synoptic weather setup possible for major storm development. But the storm might miss many cities on the East Coast. At least the bullseye might miss it, with the exception of a couple, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. Let's get to the Chicago area. We have right now, for the first 12 miles out of the lake, it's ice. The lake has turned to ice for the first 12 miles. The impact that's going to have on any lake effect snow is likely going to be minimal because it had a minimal impact this past weekend. The Chicago crib temperature is believed to be at 38 degrees. That came from someone reporting the National Weather Service, but I didn't see it myself in the National Weather Service, so we're going to leave it with that 38 degrees. Windy.com, it showed 36 degrees. Sometimes Windy.com is a week off when it comes to these lake water temperatures. Either way, we have, if you go to the European computer model, you go to Windy.com and you look at what the temperatures are going to be 5,000 feet above the surface at the 850 MB level, it's very close to 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Very close to 0 degrees Fahrenheit, ranging from 2 below 0 to 2 above 0, something like that. So that means we definitely have more than the 23-degree difference necessary for organized lake effect snow. And not only that, but if we do have the Chicago crib temperature 38 degrees, then we have enough of a temperature difference to produce heavy lake effect snow. That's something that will likely happen at some point. Heavy lake effect snow will likely happen. The National Weather Service is telling us that the snow to water ratios are going to be more than 25-1. But again, that's unusually fluffy, but it's typical for lake effect, especially in the extreme bitter cold that's headed here for this weekend, because the polar vortex of 42 below 0 travels right overhead over the weekend as it makes its way down into the south. And here's the trick for the East Coast. It's all about the Idaho high. We're getting the Western Ridge, as the Baltimore National Weather Service loves to call it. The Western Ridge is, they call it the Idaho Ridge. The Idaho Ridge, the strength of that Idaho Ridge, the most ideal setup for snow, everything for the East Coast is you have an Idaho Ridge that forces the jet stream to buckle in the middle parts of the country by the Arctic. It forces the air downward. Then you have a blocking high over the Hudson Bay. That creates a traffic jam. That thing doesn't move. And then you have something called the 50-50 low. The 50-50 low is what pushes those storms towards the coast and not out to sea. That's a low-pressure system that generally is stationary around 50 degrees north latitude and 50 degrees west longitude. So when you have that, so that's when you have an ideal setup for storm development on the East Coast. But this is what the Boston, Massachusetts National Weather Service has informed us of, is that it all depends on what's going to be happening with the polar vortex, the 500 MB lobe polar vortex, the extreme pocket of cold air coming out of Canada, that 500 MB level. What that does, if that thing drops south and stalls in the central Appalachians, then we have a snowstorm making its way into the cities on the East Coast. We could be, especially Massachusetts and Nantucket especially, but if that high pressure ridge in Idaho isn't as strong, or the polar vortex, the way it interacts with the ridge in Idaho, causes it to dig all the way south into Georgia, that's what's going to push the storm off the coast. That's how it was explained from the National Weather Service. That's when the cities will miss the storm. However, right now it's forecasted to either they're saying they don't know it's 50-50. There really is no way to pinpoint anything down, but it does sound like the New York City National Weather Service is leaning towards a just miss scenario. They also mentioned something about when you have the they mentioned about some variable there was some other variable that they're mentioning, which is an indicator that the heaviest snow remains offshore. That's the New York City National Weather Service. Nonetheless, we do have some of the places in the East Coast that stick out just a little bit, might be getting winter storm warning criteria, especially, I would say, Nantucket in Massachusetts. That place seems like even the European computer model right now is showing heavy snowfall for that area. That's the East Coast storm. Let's go back to the Chicago area, because the Chicago area will likely be seeing a winter storm watch as well with winter storm warning criteria. Because what's amazing is that even though we do not have an organized storm system, in many ways there's more confidence in the development of something serious here in Chicago than on the East Coast. The question is just exactly where will it be developing? So there's a few things that we need. We have that temperature difference between the surface lake temperature and temperatures 850 MB up 5,000 feet. We have a large difference in temperatures that's going to produce moderate to heavy lake effect snow. What we also have is we have northeast winds running the entire fetch of Lake Michigan from northeast all the way to southwest. It's going over the entire lake for much of the day Friday and much of the day Saturday and much of Friday night. Here's the other thing, is that when you go to 5,000 feet above the surface, the European computer model shows those winds off the lake continuously for the entire period, Friday and Saturday. Chicago, it shows northeast winds, the 5,000 feet above the surface. This is what I looked at for last Sunday's storm. That's what I looked at, the 5,000 feet above the surface, and it's consistent. There's nothing to talk about. It's consistently, there's winds coming in off the lake, northeast winds, hour by hour, especially starting 8 a.m. Friday. If you want to get into other layers of the atmosphere, maybe you could start 9 a.m., and then the models show precipitation over the area already by 9 a.m. But if you look at the winds, it could be here even before 9 a.m. The National Weather Service is saying daybreak. So we have the northeast winds run the full fetch of Lake Michigan, and they continue. When you look 5,000 feet above the surface, they continue all day Friday, Friday night, and Saturday. If you look at the surface winds, so that's when things change. If you look at the surface winds, so then you have the northeast winds from 8 or 9 a.m. Friday morning, maybe even daybreak, all the way until about 6 p.m. Friday evening. And then if we were to judge the precipitation by surface winds, the winds do start to shift, and the snow would then head into Indiana. And then on Saturday, they kind of try to shift back for a little bit. So if you look at the precipitation that the European computer model shows, it reflects the surface winds. But with lake effect, I have read, and this past Sunday backs this up, is that what's most important is what's going on 5,000 feet above the surface. The surface winds are a support to it. So I would say if you have the 5,000 feet above the surface winds running the full fetch of Lake Michigan, that snow, the model might not show snow, but the models didn't show snow last Sunday either when we were looking at it on Wednesday. But the models did show northeast winds off the full fetch of Lake Michigan, 5,000 feet above the surface throughout the day Sunday, and that's exactly what happened this past Sunday. So that's, if we were to do the same thing again, we would say that's what one could expect to happen generally. Although it will have snow, generally there will be snow on Friday. And yeah, there could be on and off. That's the nature of lake effect bands. Lake effect snow is that it's on and off. It stops. And then Friday night, generally, if we were to look at the 5,000 feet winds, generally the lake effect snow will continue. And then on Saturday, even more so, generally the lake effect snow will continue. The National Weather Service has some doubts regarding Friday night and Saturday, and they have higher confidence of it continuing in Indiana and not Illinois. But again, you have to realize is that the models sometimes are looking at surface winds. It's going to get too complex if we bring them in, because no one knows for sure right now at this point. We'll just say that the winds 5,000 feet above the surface are the most important part when it comes to lake effect snow, the temperatures and the winds. And that profile is ideal throughout Friday night and Saturday. It's ideal to bring lake effect snow into northeast Illinois here in West Rogers Park. It's the same setup that we had last Sunday. The only difference is I believe the temperatures are colder, and the winds I believe are stronger, and it's a long duration event. The surface winds matching up to the upper atmosphere winds is important regarding the intensity of the snow, because they'll be matching up from throughout the day Friday. I would think the snow will fall at a higher intensity on Friday. Okay? The National Weather Service is saying they think the higher intensity snow bands will develop Saturday, and that might happen in Indiana. So that's important to point out. But there will be a time Saturday also where they match up again. So if we were to go by the 5,000 feet above the surface, which is what happened last Sunday. So let's say a lot of times in a season, patterns are similar. So let's say that happens again over here. So what I would think would happen is you have a heavier lake effect snow sets up for Friday. The snow showers continue. These are snow showers. They continue on and off Friday night of less intensity, and then they become heavier again at some point on Saturday before lightening up. That's what I would think is going to happen. The past two events of these lake effect snows of January, lake effect snow, we go back to the year 2022. That produced 4 to 10 inches of snow, and the one this year also produced 4 to 10 inches of snow. So it would be reasonable to go ahead and say we'll be getting 4 to 10 inches of snow. The only thing is that because of the long duration, you have to wonder whether 10 inches is a responsible upper limit. This is the National Weather Service is saying this is from Friday all the way, did they say Sunday morning? I think they say Sunday morning. It's a 36-hour event. Some even say 48-hour event. It's a 36 to 48-hour event. So the 4-inch line, that makes sense to say 4 inches. But the question is, will we likely have places that get more than 10? And, to say 10 is the upper limit is going to have to be more than 10. It would have to be a number closer to 20. And whether that's going to be in Illinois or Indiana, that is a question mark. But we have high snow-to-water ratios. We have a large difference in temperatures between the lake and between the upper atmosphere. We do have 12 miles of ice or so. So it's as if we're already 12 miles inland in a certain way when the snow comes in. So that's something that we didn't have back in. I don't think we had that back in 2022, but we got the 4 to 10 inches. Okay, so we don't have any system snow in this one either. Now, back on the East Coast, just to mention, you have extremely cold Arctic air, which is going to be headed to Jacksonville, Florida, on the 500 MB level. What happens is it's like a polar vortex. When that thing hits the warm Gulf Stream, that's when a bomb cyclone develops. A low pressure, heat rises, so the dropping pressure, rising air is going to be producing dropping pressure. That's where the storm develops. That's why we have such an intensification of low pressure, expected to even reach 28.4, which is 28.5 and then 28.4. This is category 3 hurricane strength regarding pressure. The European computer model does take most of it off the coast with just, perhaps a few inches for the coastal cities. The exceptions are a couple places in North Carolina, South Carolina, and then Massachusetts where it really sticks out. And you have the GFS, which as of last night was really bringing the heaviest snow really into the coastal cities. So it's definitely a major storm. We had a major storm this past weekend over the East Coast. We know that the Baltimore area got from 6 to 9 inches of snow, but it melted down to 1.99 inches of water equivalent, which would be equivalent to about a 20-inch blizzard. And that's due to the 2 to 4 inches of that fell as sleet, which is something really phenomenal. They haven't seen a sleet storm like that since 1994. A lot of details on that East Coast storm. That's when you had the Pineapple Express jet stream from Hawaii collided with Siberian Express jet stream. That's what happened last week. And that's when you got that storm that just impacted a very large part of this country. And the placement of the storm, again, brought these northeast winds over to Chicago. Someone who's living in Chicago this winter for the first time might think that lake effect snow is a common occurrence here in Chicago. Well, this winter, it seems like it is, especially if it's going to happen for the third time. And this one looks like a long duration event. So stay safe. Remember the weather, these lake effect snow, it's unpredictable. We have the high resolution models, which are really essential if we're going to use the models to forecast the snow. Otherwise, we just use the global models to look at the general winds and the storm placements and come up with what is the most likely scenario to happen based on that. For the snow lovers, you're going to have a lot of fun, I hope, and hopefully no disappointments. And these are... So I wish everyone well and stay safe. And we hope to get accurate forecasts, especially when dangerous situations develop like this, or especially when things could be disappointing for some. Thank you for listening. I wish everybody a great day and have a wonderful week.